Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction.
See what the Empire has done to your lives? Your families and your freedom?
Good people will fight if we lead them.
The rebellion is spreading.
Now we take the war to them.
The Republic will be reorganized.
Systems either change or die.
Into the first.
You give way to an enemy this evil with this much power, and you condemn the galaxy to an eternity of submission.
And wake up. There is one way. Now fighting from the start.
Long live the Empire!
Fight the Empire!
Let's call it war.
Remember this. Try.
Hey, Sophie.
Hi, Eleanor.
What do you call the Last Jedi?
Solo? Han Solo?
No, what? No. So the Jedi are genocided, right? What do you call the guy who's left over? Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Oh, no.
Welcome
To the Genocide Podcast, where we talk about horrible things all the time.
Welcome to Daughters of Ferrix, a political, historical, and frankly, radical Star Wars podcast. Radical in the cool way, sometimes radical in the other way.
I was recently told that I really put the radical in radical liberal, so...
In a good way. An extra special welcome to this, our first episode of the new year. Thank you so much all for your excellent support over the last few months. I am genuinely incredibly grateful to everyone who listens, follows us, tweets at or emails us, and shares our episodes with people they know. We put a lot of work into this show. I care a lot about it personally, and being able to go from creating the show to having several hundred consistent listeners and 4,500 listens, that's a big deal. So if you are listening to this now, I hope you know, specifically you, how thankful I am for giving us your time and your enthusiasm.
And as for our best wishes for you for 2024, a small smattering of existential dread that there are exactly 6 years left until we're all screwed from climate change. So, I don't know, eat chicken instead of beef. You can also take my route, which is don't drive.
You could just not drive. You could take my route, not drive because you're at home making this podcast, which I will be doing for the foreseeable future. You know, even when we're dead and gone, I hope that humanity is remembered by the Daughters of Ferrix podcast.
Yeah, the aliens, like, when the sound waves and the radio waves start hitting them and the internet, like, pings off their satellites for the first time, you know what the first thing they're going to be listening to is?
Us.
The Daughters of Ferrix podcast.
Our voices right now. So, Star Wars, supposedly.
It happened in space a long time ago.
Well, technically you could make the argument that a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away...
It was a bit.
...is not from the standpoint of our world. So people being like, the Star Wars happened according to the Star Wars, that's not necessarily true. We are not necessarily canon to Star Wars. In fact, I would argue we are not.
Continuing on about this wonderful space series that we talk about so often.
It's kind of rote at this point to say that people do war crimes in Star Wars, especially the Republic in the Clone Wars. It's trotted out as like a fun, edgy factoid by dude bros who got recommended a video about it on YouTube. Like, hey, did you know that in the EU, Ki-Adi-Mundi has 4 wives? It's that kind of shtick. War crimes is basically the Viggo Mortensen broken toe of Star Wars discourse these days. But who cares? I don't care that it's been done to death. I want it to be lazy.
We're desperate to create content.
I worked really hard on the last 2 episodes, so...
And she wanted to do something that I know things about.
So badly. That's what we're going to be talking about today. What is the deal with real-world laws of war, and how are they represented, and how are they violated in Star Wars? Sophie, what is war crime?
Crimes you do in war.
Crimes I do in war?
Not just you, although you could...
Crimes you do in war.
Crimes we do in war.
That's beautiful.
Throughout history, as people have engaged in conflict over any number of mostly stupid things, they have done horrible things. There's a podcast I listen to called Lions Led by Donkeys, and their favorite phrase for whenever stupid wars happen is inbred idiots beefing over turf, and I think that describes most of the history of war.
That's a tongue twister. Inbred idiots beefing over turf. Inbred idiots beefing over turf. That's hard.
The point being, war is kind of horrible, right?
War bad.
And it used to be much worse. For most of the history of war, almost everything was fair game. Residents of vanquished cities could expect a delightful melange of crimes, including, but not limited to, theft, arson, assault, murder, infanticide, and in some cases, complete extermination.
That's a hell of a list.
And I should mention not limited to, because soldiers are really good at finding ways to, like, come up with new horrible things to do to people?
It's on the application when they sign up.
Are you creative as regards to killing civilians? A particularly kind of notable example of this happened during the Mongol conquest of the 13th century, when Tamerlane, who was a rather successful Mongol leader, at one point exterminated a city and turned the 70,000 inhabitants' skulls into a pyramid.
So wait, all 70,000 are...
Killed all of them.
Okay.
And turned their skulls into a pyramid.
That's a lot of, like, cleaning skulls. Like, you'd need, like, a factory line for that.
I think that this is, like, what the Mongols did to stimulate their economy instead of lowering interest rates, is, like, just
They
kill...
paid people to scoop out the... Oh my god, that's horrible.
This is the Mongol jobs program.
I guess trigger warning, TW : scooping out brains of dead Mongol. Wait, hang on, who was it? It wasn't Mongols.
I think they were, like, somewhere in Afghanistan.
Oh...
Afghanistan has had a rough time of it, like, always, because it's just situated in exactly the wrong place.
Pro tip for anyone in Afghanistan currently. Afghanistan.
Leave.
Yeah, don't be in Afghanistan currently. Have they thought about that in Afghanistan, not being in Afghanistan anymore? The US thought about that. It took them a while, but they thought about it.
And I mean, even apart from, like, kind of state-sanctioned war crimes like that, because that is a war crime, murdering all of the civilians of the city is in fact a war crime.
Well, actually, it's not a war crime because they didn't have war crimes back then.
It's not a war crime if you do it against fascists. Continuing, even apart from the kind of state-sanctioned war crimes, many soldiers could do basically anything they wanted in war and not be punished. Like, if you think about the Crusades, right? One time in the Fourth Crusade, the Crusaders, instead of going to Jerusalem and, like, you know, mucking it up with the Turks or whatever, they just sacked Zara, which is a Christian city, in what is currently Croatia.
Just 'cause?
To pay the Venetians who were transporting them on boats.
Oh, okay, just 'cause.
And then they went to Constantinople, also a Christian city, and sacked it that time just 'cause. And most of them didn't even get excommunicated for that.
Most of them. But some did. So that's a win for the church.
Not many. Because the Pope was scared that the army would come back and, like, sack Rome. So, this kind of behavior by soldiers was expected even when society abhorred it. And that's not to say that there were no rules. Many types of soldiers in various societies had rules governing their behaviors. If you think about, like, knights in the medieval era, right? They have the code of chivalry.
Right. These guys do war and actually have rules.
Yeah. Or, like, I don't know, the samurai. They had rules about how they're supposed to fight each other and stuff.
Right. It's like, as humanity, we create rules in order to, like, function socially. Laws are rules, like, more complicated than that. But, like, sometimes we just kind of go, I don't know, don't do this stuff. Yeah.
But none of these were, like, legally codified or internationally binding. So there's, like, a big disparity in, like, how it works. But then we do this great thing called modernity. Basically, society got cocked, is what happened.
Modernity : society gets cocked.
The actual term war crimes would not be invented until 1872, but several developments led up to that point. The first of these being the trial of Peter von Hagenbach. So, Peter von Hagenbach, I'm gonna do that German thing because I'm
sure that's really good in the mic.
I don't care. Who was a Burgundian knight, was the first person to be tried for something that could resemble the modern conception of war crimes.
Wait, he's a what knight?
Burgundian. Back when Burgundy was its
Burgundy's
own
a
country.
place?
Burgundy. Yeah, it was...
Burgundy's a color.
The color Burgundy is named after the royal, or the ducal signet of Burgundy.
It's not Burgundy unless it comes from the Burgundy region.
Of France.
Otherwise, it's just sparkling brown.
So in 1474, he was executed for failing to prevent, because that's what you got punished by in everything back then.
Rip Bozo.
He was executed for failing to prevent his soldiers from committing crimes, including murder, rape, and theft, against the residents of the town of Brezock, which he was occupying at the time. He argued that he was just following orders from Charles the Bold, who was the Duke of Burgundy at the time.
What did his soldiers say? Did they say that they were following orders?
Well, you don't normally try individual soldiers.
But did you ask me that they called as witness? They're like, oh, we were following orders, and Burgundy's like, oh, I was following orders.
They were all peasants, so what they said didn't matter.
Oh, damn. Class gets everyone in the end.
Yeah, but the court held him liable, which established the principle of, quote, command responsibility, that commanders are responsible for the actions of those they command, which is a central concept to the concept of war crimes. Customs around how war was conducted, especially in certain industrializing states, also began to change. So the Lieber Code, which is from from 1863 was a set of U.S. wartime statutes developed during the American Civil War. It is a particularly good early example of, like, creating rules of war. It codified command responsibility into the Union Army's rules of war and provided consequences for those committing crimes against Confederate civilians. I would like to put the word civilians in quotes, given that they were slave owners. I mean, I'm normally not for, like, burning down people's houses, but Sherman was correct to do so. So it was named for a Prussian officer who had fought in a number of wars and seen some rather gruesome atrocities, and was the first extensively codified set of rules governing military conduct in times of martial law. Also, interestingly, it may have been one of the first laws against racial discrimination in the United States.
Whoa.
As it required Union officers to not consider race in prisoner exchanges or captivity rules.
Yeah, that's, I mean,
Woke.
the military's gone woke.
It's kind of a theme in American society that the military is ahead of society in general, which is really weird.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, accepting people because they just want you to go shoot a guy.
Right. The military has one goal, and it's to do military shit. And so when people are like, the military's gone woke, it's like, no, the military's off killing people.
The military has always been woke.
Like, the military is, like, reductive in that they're like, let's go do imperialism. And they don't care about anyone else.
To the military, American means that you can shoot a guy. By this time, many other armies in the world had rules around treatment and exchange of prisoners, as well as the treatment of occupied civilian population. One can think of the British Army riding out of Yorktown under a flag of truce after, the French and Americans went ham on them, or all of Napoleon's officers surrendering to the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo, like kind of what we would think of as gentlemanly warfare.
They're so sweet and
However,
kind and decent.
It should be noted that these rules generally did not apply to native populations.
Who could have seen that coming?
Like, the Duke of Wellington may be all like, oh yes, you chaps from France aren't so bad, you can surrender to us. But then he goes to India and he's like, no quarter.
Right. The law exists by and for white people. Right, people. Right.
Versus the savages.
Black and brown people are specifically exempt, whether or not it's said.
Or at least black and brown people belonging to independent nations, primarily of black and brown people. Like, if you're, like, a colonial power and you capture some other colonial power's black regiment, you're still gonna, like, do a prisoner exchange with them because you don't want...
Because they were the regiment.
Because they're part of the imperial...
They are part of the imperialist war machine.
Because they said I had. Cassian said I had to.
That brings us to the Hague Conventions.
Oh my god, I know her.
Of 1899 and 1907.
She's so cunt. I love her.
Yeah, which established a number of rules for how wars would be begun, fought, and ended between various major states. These would largely be based off of the Lieber Code.
Hear that? The U.S. invented it. The U.S. would never do war crimes.
We're not going to run down all the war crimes that the U.S. has committed, but... Yeah, so the Hague Conventions kind of established the rules for how you, like, start a war. Like, now you have to, like, send a little, like, letter being like, hello, old chap, you German boys have been awful naughty there in the East, so, and you've invaded Belgium, so we're going to have a brawl.
First you have to sext your opponent and you up.
You have to send an ultimatum, and then you have to, like, submit your, like, diplomat in their country has to submit, like, a written notice that you're at war. And
God, that's so hot.
It's so European. And then there's, like, turning the customary laws of war, which at this time are, like, don't kill prisoners, don't kill civilians that much.
Right, stuff you,
don't steal shit.
Generally don't do because everyone agrees that it's probably a bad idea, turning that into law, right?
Yeah, it's called customary international law, things that all countries do, even if it's not, like, legal. They turn that into, like, official international law. And then also, like, just a mind-numbing amount of stuff, like, about how you're supposed to treat boats and stuff, because commerce is important. I kid you not, the first 4 conventions of the Hague Convention are of all the things we just talked about, and then the rest are just like boats.
Started in 1899, right?
There are 13.
It's a lot of boat shit around
there. There are 13 conventions, and like 8 of them are boats.
These are the boat conventions.
They also, in the 1907 convention, explicitly addressed the conditions of sick and wounded soldiers by adding the provisions of the 1906 Geneva Convention to the international magisterium.
Okay, hang on. What is the relationship between Hague and Geneva?
So this is actually a different Geneva Convention than the one that we're mostly going to talk about.
Okay, so this is just one that happens to be a Geneva Convention.
This happens to be a Geneva Convention. It was the first Geneva Convention.
But it's not the Geneva Convention.
It's not the one we talk of.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a different one, and it's mostly about, like...
They just thought they'd pop over to Geneva.
You have to help wounded enemy soldiers, and you can't blow up hospitals with artillery.
That's a nice one.
Did that stop anyone? Not on the Eastern Front. So the real Geneva Conventions, the 1949 ones that govern, like, international war crime law today, were in 1949 after the Second World War, when everyone was like, oh shit, 80 million people just died in this war that we had. Most of them were civilians.
How do we do anything else
How
if
do we
war
have
happens
a
again?
war?
When war happens again.
How do we have a war and not, like, kill a third of the Soviet Union?
That's the big question. How do we kill any amount less of the Soviet Union?
The reason that the Soviet Union lost the Cold War is because they won World War II.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they would probably still be around. Which, like, from kind of a very liberal perspective that I am at, I think would be a good thing, because there were several times in American history when the Soviet Union, like, got a bridge built because, you know, you're in, like, West Virginia or whatever, the government's really poor. This is a true story, by the way. And your bridge falls down because it's old.
Sure.
As happens. So then you're like, hey, West Virginia government, fix it. This is the only way to get into our tiny town of 32 people. And the government is like, no. So then you write a letter to the Soviet premier.
Right, yes.
And be like, hey, you want to build a bridge for us? And then he's like broadcasting on Pravda or whatever, like, the Soviet Union support our fraternal socialist brothers in West Virginia by building bridge with paratroopers.
Well,
and then the government builds a bridge for you.
I can't remember who said it, but there's this line in organizing, which is, if you want to form a union, call the communists. You don't have to be a communist. You might have full intentions of never being a communist, but they want to build a union.
Right, and they can scare the factory owners as well, because you call a communist, right, and they're like...
They're the real deal.
They come into the thing. And so if you're not a communist and you're trying to start a union, then the owner's suddenly like, I would much rather talk to you than the guy who is like, guillotine the pigs.
Right. The person who has the reputation of being, you know...
Yeah, so the Geneva Conventions,
plural.
There's an S there. When someone says, I violated the Geneva Convention, you should shoot them because they're an idiot, and they don't know what they're talking about.
So the Geneva Conventions say that you should shoot people because they're idiots.
Yeah, it's in the fourth Geneva Convention.
Where there are only 3?
No, there are 4. It's in the 5th one.
Okay, very good.
So it's a series of treaties called conventions, which is why it's the Geneva Conventions.
Yeah, you go to Geneva, you dress up with your friends, you go to panels, you get some stuff signed by your favorite...
civilians is bad, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
Today there are 149 signees of this, which is every country that's like internationally recognized fully, including North Korea. So Convention 1 protects wounded and sick soldiers on land during war and establishes the Red Cross and Red Crescent as the international symbols for a hospital, which is an illegitimate military target.
Red Crescent. You don't see that one very often.
That's because you live in America.
Oh, it's a cross because it's like Jesus.
In Islamic countries, you use the Red Crescent instead of the Red Cross because you don't want someone to suicide bomb your hospital.
I didn't think about the cross as a Jesus thing. Like, I knew that,
That's
but
where
like I didn't think about that.
Like,
right. It's the cross.
Jesus will heal you.
Right, because only the church people will actually take care of anyone who's fucked.
Yes.
Back in the day.
Convention 2 is the same thing, but on the ocean. Because we really love...
Boat 1.
Convention 3 is like more POW stuff, and Convention 4 provides explicit protections for civilians and adds to the number of protections that already existed, as well as the number of things you're not allowed to do to them.
Cool. Do not the civilians.
Yeah. There have also been some kind of further developments, although they're not called conventions. They're called Common Article 3 and the additional protocols. So Common Article 3 expands protections of the Geneva Conventions to intrastate and non-state wars. So like previously, the Geneva Conventions only apply if you're like, I am the United States and I am invading Canada.
Right. As one does.
Okay,
but now it's happening if it's between states, but also if it is a state at war with a body within itself, or just non-state bodies.
Right, like, so if you have, like, Jim Bob's militia in Oregon or whatever, and it starts, like, fighting the U.S. military, the U.S. military has to follow the rules of war against Jim Bob's militia.
Okay, so this is where it applies to, like, insurrections.
Right? Civil wars,
This is what you do with the Rebel Alliance.
Yes. And then additional protocols 1 and 2 are later additions that strengthen protections for civilians. And additional protocol 3, which is the most recent, exists because the woke left hates Islam and Christianity and wanted to create a third international symbol for humanitarian facilities, known as the Red Diamond.
Yes, okay, I know this one. I appreciate that. As I would personally suicide bomb anywhere that had a Red Cross or a Red Crescent. So it's good that they have a secret third thing.
Yeah.
Also, the 2 genders.
The 2 genders, Islam Islam and Christianity.
And then the secret third thing.
The secret third thing, wokeism.
The secret third thing being an atheist.
True.
Actually, being anything else, actually.
So now basically all countries are signed on to the Geneva Conventions. So like you can't do war crimes anymore. It's now illegal to do war crime, whereas it previously was not.
Crime is now illegal.
This is Joe Biden's America. But there has been kind of one more development since then, and that is the International Criminal Court, which is new.
How new?
2002 new.
That's new as shit.
That is very new because
that's as new as Attack of the Clones.
So as we develop this kind of framework for being like, you should not do war crimes against people, we realized that we had this problem of actually being able to prosecute people for doing war crimes, because all the other times we'd done war crimes were like the Nuremberg trials, where it's a bunch of US generals sitting and being like, Nazi, execute, Nazi, execute. Or the Tokyo trials, where it's like, complicit in the rape of Nanking, execute. Yeah, or like, you have to be like, do the thing that Israel did in the 60s with Adolf Eichmann, who is known as the architect of the Holocaust, where the Mossad kidnapped him from Argentina and brought him to face trial in Jerusalem.
Where it's just like, I don't know, at that point it's just whoever can try them or wants real badly to try them tries them, and that's not the most law-ish.
So we create this court in 2002, the UN creates this court, and they're like, okay, we're gonna try war criminals.
So if you have a war criminal, we take care of it.
And everybody signs on to this, who signs on to the Geneva Conventions, until George W. Bush.
They go around the room,
First time,
and this guy signs it, and that guy signs it.
The first time W comes into our podcast, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
Wow.
Welcome, soon-to-be frequent guest of the podcast, George W. Bush.
Genuinely, that is a shock.
This court, like, it's a good idea, right? And the Europeans love it because they're too normal for the rest of us. They like this thing called the rule of law that the rest of us think is dumb.
They have their own things that aren't normal, but not really compared to America.
Or, like, Russia, China. Like,
not compared to the big ones.
Not compared to the important countries.
Normal by comparison.
Oh, and I should mention that the ICC has only ever tried 31 people. So, these are mostly crippled because the United States, Russia, China, India, and basically every other country of consequence except for the Europeans has either not accepted ICC jurisdiction or has later withdrawn from the treaty that established it.
Why?
Another George W. Bush L. The U.S. withdrew during the Iraq War because Cheney and Bush didn't want to get in trouble for killing people, because they would have been held responsible for this.
Oh no. A president being held responsible for war crimes? Don't threaten a girl with a good time.
Yeah, this thing is kind of useless, but everyone still believes in the Geneva Conventions. That's kind of a not-so-brief history of how international law governing war crimes came into being. Let's go over some actions that actually are war crimes.
So, we're starting with the obvious one. False surrender.
Yeah, you, as it turns out, cannot be like, oh, je me rends, I surrender. And then, like, have...
Were you waving your white flag?
I was waving my white flag.
for the listening audience.
For the microphone. And then you're like, your bro Francois can't, like, pop up from behind a tree and start machine gunning everyone.
Right, okay, so let me tell a story here. So, towards the beginning of the Clone War, the Separatist army invades and captures the resource-rich Outer Rim world Christophsis. This is in the Clone Wars movie. I finally got to talk about the Clone Wars movie. They blockade Christophsis, but the blockade is broken when the Republic sends a fleet of Venators and a prototype stealth corvette. Don't worry about it. They get a division of Republic troops to the surface and set up a base, but the Separatist blockade reforms in conflict against Republic destroyers, so they can't get people through. On the surface, Republic soldiers aim to occupy the capital city, Caledonia. They maintain defense against both aerial and ground attack by use of several AV-7 anti-vehicle ground cannons, but the Separatist army general... So the Separatist general is named Worm Loathsome.
Wait, how is that spelled exactly?
WHORMLOATHSOM.
They didn't even try and change it.
No, they did not try. Anyway, yeah.
And now this is forever canon. Isn't that great?
Thanks, George Lucas. Thanks, Star Wars. Anyway, Loathsome uses a portable...
I hate to be named Worm Loathsome.
This part of the episode is actually pretty good. Here's the thing about the Clone Wars movie. It would have been a pretty good start to the Clone Wars if they broke it up into episodes. But instead, the actual show, it opens weird if you want to stream it, because it starts with whatever fuck-ass episode, and which is a fine episode, again, but, like, not as good as, like, if they did Christophsis. Anyway, not important. I've just been thinking about this. Loathsome uses a portable deflector shield, pulling his troops back behind it, and then advancing droids and tanks forward into the Republic base as the shield moves moves with them, and Republic cannons are useless against it. So you have the shield going, and the cannons are right here. Yeah, and then the cannons aren't going to be able to do anything to the troops inside it until the troops get to the cannons. I don't know why everyone doesn't use this all the time, but whatever, it's Star Wars.
It's expensive.
Maybe. I don't know.
The Naboo people do it.
The shield
The
thing?
Gungans, yeah.
Yeah, but they don't
advance because...
They just stay put.
They're just like, yeah, that's a great plan, because mobility is not key to warfare. Anyhow...
So, okay, this is real. Anakin and Ahsoka hide under a box while the shield and droid line moves forward, which gets them behind enemy lines.
The shield will kill you.
No.
If you go under it.
Maybe. I don't know.
Then why did they hide under a box?
So they didn't. So they weren't seen. They were right fucking there.
Oh.
Yeah. So they can't be seen. So they're under a box. The shield goes over them, and now they're behind enemy lines to go attack the shield. Right. Meanwhile, the shield passes over Obi-Wan and his stationed clones, which brings them head to head with the droids, which their limited number of troops are overwhelmed by. And eventually, Obi-Wan is face to face with General Loathsome. He is pinned down by battle droids, and in order to give Anakin and Ahsoka more time to take out the shield, General Kenobi personally announces his surrender. Before agreeing to stand his troops down, Kenobi insists on having a seat with the general and sharing a cup of tea, saying, "Surely there's no reason we can't be civilized about this." So he's surrendered, but his troops are still fighting.
So he's just doing perfidy.
Yeah, it's engaging in combat under false pretenses. Well, we're getting there. So Loathsome and Kenobi chat for a bit. Kenobi really puts on a show of a humble defeat, negotiating the custody of his troops, their supplies and shelter, etc. The Separatist general sees that he's stalling, gets angry, and accuses Kenobi of buying time, which Obi-Wan denies. Battle droids grab Kenobi, and as they do, the generator's blown and the shield goes down.
It is so over for the droids.
Yeah. Obi-Wan jumps behind the general. He holds him in a headlock, and so the general goes, don't shoot or you'll hit me. And the Republic fleet breaks the Separatist blockade. More troops join Obi-Wan to take the capital city. Eventually, Christophsis. They win, all because Obi-Wan fakes his surrender, which, I mean...
Yeah, you can't
do that.
No, it's illegal. You're not allowed to use... If you're under a flag of truce, right, there are certain laws that apply. The enemy is not allowed to shoot you if you're under flag of truce, but you are not allowed to use a truce, trying to negotiate something, as, cover for maneuvering. If you're getting your butt beat in, I don't know, the Battle of Hoodiwatsit or whatever, and you and the Grand Army of Tennessee are, you're losing bad. So you're okay, well, I'm gonna go and negotiate with this guy so that I have time to bring in the Grand Army of Ohio.
Right, and specifically, perfidy as a war crime is this, blanket attacking the enemy under false pretenses. So you can surrender, or you can kill the enemy, but you can't surrender and then kill the enemy. Anyway, it's not a big deal, but it is super weird for Star Wars to name the other guy Worm when Obi-Wan wins by lying. So, okay, this is not the only time this happens. Later on, Anakin does it a couple of times to break a Separatist blockade, including a Lucra Hulk over the planet Ryloth. Anakin calls the Separatist general from a damaged Venator and claims he's been ordered to surrender himself, his vessel, and his crew. But the general scans the Venator, he discovers that there's only one organic life form aboard, and names Anakin's treachery for what it is. But he's too late. Anakin ditches the ship, and the Venator plows full speed into the Lucra Hulk, which blows it up, kills the general, and the other Republic Venator breaks the blockade and they win, right? Anakin does it again in the final days of the war on Urbana during a firefight on a bridge. So Anakin asks the droids to hold fire and fully surrenders. And to negotiate the surrender, their droid general exposes themselves above the defensive wall. And as the droid general recognizes the surrender as a trap, Anakin pulls him through the air with the Force and beheads him. And on cue, clones from the 501st fly from under the bridge because they've been using the time to crawl under, and they win. They win the battle too.
Wow. Anakin did a lot of war crime.
My guy sucks.
I mean, this isn't the sort of war crime you get executed for, right? This is the kind you get, life prison for, but, it's bad.
Well, and it's okay, why don't you do false surrender?
Oh, I don't know. Would you like to have that happen to you?
You don't false surrender so that you can surrender later.
Right, because if you fake surrender, and then you want to actually surrender later after the Grand Army of the Tennessee gets its butt whooped anyway, congratulations, they're just gonna shoot you because they won't believe you. Also, if you win and the other guy does a false surrender, then it's just, bad.
Right, it's a mess now. So the Separatist generals do learn that the Republic forces can't be trusted and surrender. Both of those guys with Anakin were what? No, you're fucking lying, guy. But battle droids are largely so incompetent that it can buy the Republic some time. It doesn't seem like the Separatists ever attempt this shit themselves either, which they should. But we also don't have any instances that I can recall of actual CIS surrender in battle. Battle droids consider surrender and show a sense of self-preservation because they beg for mercy, but it doesn't seem like droid generals or others ever actually formally yield. They might not be programmed for it at all, and the same might be true for clones. And like, I genuinely wonder if there is such a disregard for surrender because of the ways in which both forces see their troops, right? Clones and battle droids are both widely seen as disposable.
Expendable.
Yeah, they're automatons. Fighting to the last man might not be seen as a huge loss to the people higher up on the chain of command.
Especially our boy Sheev.
Yeah, he doesn't give a shit. He literally doesn't give a shit. So, okay, I watched this video, this old, like, 10-year-old video about false flag terrorism in Star Wars. Because I was like, I wonder if this person makes any interesting points. Because I look at that. I'll look at really old, like, political analysis of Star Wars just to see if there's any good ideas. Because there's usually none, except for, like, one. And that's enough. And so I pulled up this video, and I watched all of it, and it was fine. And apparently it was not even uploaded by the creator. It was uploaded by something else. But I was watching this video, and right after they got through the intro, they were like, you know, if you're interested in more about this, I highly recommend this film. And it is on the like Starfield Star Wars backdrop. The person like edits on, what is it? Not Path to Freedom. What's that fucking movie called? By Alex Jones. And I burst out laughing. I was like, oh, this is what we're doing. And so the video was fine. It wasn't even, it just had like a little dash of 9/11 trutherism in it. We'll talk about that in a sec. Okay, so we're gonna pivot to a different type of perfidy. So, false flags. Sophie, what's a false flag?
You're Canada, right?
I'm Canada.
And you want to start a war with the United States because
Desperately.
you're an idiot.
God.
And so you, like, have your guys put on American uniforms and then go into America and then come back into Canada, blow some shit up, go back into America,
and then
switch
take off
into
your
Canadian uniforms, and then
and
come
cross
back
the border
to Canada.
legally.
And then you can be like, oh, they really blew up our cell phone tower. Hey, we gotta start a war with America, don't you know? And it's a false flag. It's doing actions against yourself or other countries under false pretenses, normally with the goal of, like, provoking an incident.
So, a false flag is named after the naval tactic of running a flag up the mast.
A pirate tactic, actually.
Yeah, it's very, is that thing. It's you have the friendly flag up, you're like, yeah, Union Jack, we're British, and then they get close enough, and you're like, fuck you, pirate flag!
And what they would do is, like, literally, like, pull down the British flag real fast, and, like, raise a pirate flag.
Because it's funny as shit. It's so fucking funny. Yeah, it's misrepresenting your loyalties so you can get a one-up on your opponent. So, I will say, to understand a false flag, I think we kind of have to talk about the wartime utility of the uniform. In the barest terms, what uniform someone is wearing is a way to communicate who and who not to kill, right? If I'm wearing a uniform, I'm implicitly telling both enemies and allies how they're supposed to treat me according to the previously established conflict. And it works for the people around me too. That person is my same uniform, she's my pal, don't kill her. That guy has the enemy uniform, shoot him. This person isn't wearing a uniform at all, civilian, don't shoot, war crime.
You have, like, the little HUD that has, like, shows up red when you... Civilian.
But yeah, pretty straightforward. You get why it works.
And you also get why, like, people really like to get mad at, like, well, why did they, back in, you know, the 1700s, why did they wear such bright colors? Because the commander would be, like, way in the back with the artillery, and he would have to tell them where to shoot. And so you had to be able to tell what your guys were, so you didn't artillery your own troops.
The idea of two clearly defined military entities engaging in combat with one another is the platonic, minimally destructive ideal of warfare that laws of war aim to enshrine. One of the reasons a false flag can be bad is it absolutely fucks with that system and incentivizes, sometimes with the threat of death, firing on your teammates or even civilians. If we look at A New Hope, Han and Luke kill a couple stormtroopers and wear their armor to sneak further into the Death Star. And when the firefight breaks out in Detention Block AA-23, they're still wearing the outfits. Say you're a stormtrooper and you're called as backup to neutralize the people trying to rescue Leia, whom you know are wearing trooper outfits just like you. And you get up to the detention block.
Like, what if you accidentally shoot Jeff from accounting?
Yeah, you get up there. You see a couple of stormtroopers. They're with the senator and they're with a Wookiee. Do you shoot those guys? It's a life or death situation. Han and Luke would shoot you as soon as they see you. But what if the troopers already here took them out? And are you fucking killing your buddy Mike? Now, okay, Han and Luke aren't actual political military entities with a codified uniform. They're just kind of guys who are on board.
But this is why even like the Rebel Alliance, which is an insurrectionary organization, wears uniforms. This is why like the Black Panthers had their hats. You need to know who your guy is.
Well, and if you are that, then since the Geneva Conventions say that it is prohibited to kill, injure, or capture an adversary by resort to perfidy, what they'd have to do to avoid a false flag would be to enter the cell block wearing the stormtrooper armor, take it off to reveal their enemy uniforms, and then start firing. If you just wear the enemy uniform to move through and get behind enemy lines, that's a legitimate ruse. It's only a problem when there's a firefight happening between a bunch of people wearing the same outfits.
Well, and also, I think that they're technically spies. Spies, you can just kill. This is part of the rules of war. If you are a spy, if you're engaged in espionage, the other state can just kill you no matter what. Like, you can't surrender. They can just kill you.
Wow.
They are not required to treat you as a prisoner of war. So, they're technically spies and not soldiers, I think, in this scenario.
For the record, even when Luke and Han do join a stratified military force, they keep wearing their casual outfits, so I guess I don't know, I guess that's just how they do.
Yeah, I mean, the rebels do have uniforms, and they just don't wear them.
Yeah, they just...
Like, where is Han's little thing with, like, the 4 little dots, because he's a general? Like, what's going on?
Han is not a general till much later.
General is a really weird thing in the Alliance, because it doesn't mean what it would mean in...
General just means important character.
High officer.
Yeah. General's a real thing in the Grand Army of the Republic. The Alliance just like, I don't know, that guy's a general.
You did some good stuff. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4.
I get giving people a promotion for the sake of it, but Han was in Carbonite. You're making that guy a general just because he got frozed? Make him like a major...
A brigadier general, maybe?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Another type of false flag is the juicy conspiracy kind, right? A nation state uses its resources to facilitate an attack on themselves or others that is made to seem like the actions of an outside party.
Nazis did this in Poland. This is how they started World War II, is they dressed up as Polish soldiers, walked into Poland, came back into Germany, blew some stuff up, went back to Poland, took off their uniforms, went back to Germany.
Right. You might be doing it for a foreign nation, you might be doing it for a terrorist organization, etc. A state will do this to...
justify a war, mostly.
Yeah, I mean, start a war, centralize some power.
George W. Bush did 9/11.
In order to justify the invading and overthrow of Castro's government in post-revolutionary Cuba, the U.S. military did seriously consider doing a false flag that they could blame on Castro. They were like, I don't know, maybe we'll sink a refugee ship or blow up a U.S. vessel.
I just want to say, with regards to the U.S. handling of Cuba, we're normally pretty good at regime change as a country. That's just like our biggest national embarrassment in terms of regime change. Even worse than Vietnam, because Vietnam is now our friend. But man, like the Bay of Pigs invasion, very embarrassing for the CIA. Not a good moment for them.
Anyway, the only reason we didn't do a false flag to like start a war with Cuba...
it's because the Soviet Union had nuclear weapons.
No, it's because Kennedy said no. But yeah, so this type of thing happens everywhere in Star Wars, because conspiracy is exciting, right? In A New Hope, stormtroopers on Tatooine massacre a sandcrawler full of Jawas, and specifically leave Tusken weapons and bantha tracks around to make it seem like it wasn't the Empire. You know, probably so that Jabba doesn't feel threatened by them killing indiscriminately in Hutt territory, I assume. I don't think they false flagged the Lars homestead. I looked a little bit today to see if they like tried to blame it on anyone, and it just kind of seems like they torched them. Maybe that's why they burned. I couldn't quickly find any instances of like a book mentioning, oh, they did the same thing, which they should. Like, anyway.
Throw a couple like bocce sticks or whatever on the ground and call it good.
Gaffy sticks.
Gaffy sticks.
I also think we can make the pretty comfortable assertion that the Trade Federation blockades Naboo to get the Queen to sign their stupid fucking treaty, and that is also something of a false flag, because it is ordered by Palpatine, the Senator of Naboo. And with that kind of necessarily comes the entire prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars, since at least partially with the leadership like Dooku taking direct orders from the Supreme Chancellor in his office, the call is coming from inside the house, babes. It is all to seed conflict and justify more and more centralized power, and to usher in an authoritarian state, which is widely considered a dick move. Despite having little respect for surrender enemy uniforms or faking your conflict in general, Star Wars does seem to contain a form of diplomatic immunity
that they continually violate.
So, when Darth Vader boards her ship, Leia declares that, as a senator, she was on a diplomatic mission, which is a tactic. I mean, she's on a Corvette that just came from the Battle of Scarif. But members of the Senate do seem to have a right not to be detained. And Leia says that the Senate will be outraged to know that one of their own was accosted and taken prisoner by the Empire, which makes sense. I mean, if I'm a senator who might engage in diplomacy with a hostile polity, I would also want to make sure my ass was covered. Do you think she had diplomatic immunity to be doing the Scarif stuff?
No.
Okay.
At the point where your ship has actually been actively engaging with the enemy.
Well,
like,
it was in a ship that was actively engaging with the enemy. Technically, the Tantive V4 was not doing it.
If an aircraft is on an aircraft carrier and that aircraft carrier is engaged in naval combat, that plane is part of the combat.
Okay.
Regardless of whether it is actually bombing something, and is therefore a valid target for war. Even if it has, like, I don't know, Senator William McKinley in it or something.
Either way, the Empire doesn't give a shit because they disbanded the Senate, like, right then, but...
They weren't too worried about that one.
Yeah. This is something that the Republic in its heyday generally respects. Mild spoilers for the book The Eye of Darkness, but when a group of terrorists called the Nile, when they essentially wall off a massive section of the galaxy from hyperspace access, it's wild, we will talk about it someday, a former Republic senator who joined with the Nile, Gira Staros, travels to Coruscant in a diplomatic attempt to negotiate a Nile seat on the Republic Senate and an end to the ongoing conflict. And despite then Chancellor Lina So refusing to recognize Nile space as a legitimate state, makes sense, it was claimed through conquest, she insists to an advisor that it would be wrong to take Staros prisoner as she came here in peace and can go in peace. For what it's worth though, diplomatic immunity is not exactly enough for some people. When the Trade Federation blockades
Commander,
Naboo...
look.
Yeah. The Chancellor, fucking Valorum, he sends a consular ship, there are some Jedi aboard to negotiate a peaceful resolution. The Trade Federation let them on board, they're like, we're happy to receive ambassadors, and the Jedi are shown into a meeting room.
Where they try to gas them.
Yeah, they gas the Jedi, the Federation shoots and explodes the ship while it's still in the hangar, which cannot be safe. And the Federation...
They mostly have droids on board because that would kill a lot of people.
So the Federation also sends some battle droids just to finish them off. The Jedi aren't dead, they fight back, they do the events of the film The Phantom Menace.
Yeah. They try and cut through the blast door, it's really cool.
That's in a bit, but yeah. Like, damn, from the Jedi perspective, it must have just really seemed like Gunray didn't want to talk. Just, like, super bad. Because the reason he does it is because Palpatine's like, fuck the Jedi. They get away with it, you know? Trade Federation gets away with it. So, yeah, I mean, including diplomats, a big part of laws of war is that sometimes you just generally shouldn't kill some people. Maybe because they're civilians, maybe because they're defenseless.
Maybe because they're doing humanitarian work.
Maybe they parachuted from a damaged airplane.
Maybe they're in a lifeboat.
Yeah, why don't we kill people in lifeboats, Sophie?
You know, it seems like, it's just common decency to not kill people in lifeboats because they already had one ship sunk out from under them. But the actual reason you do it is because as soon as you are in a lifeboat, you are a non-combatant. Because a lifeboat does not have weapons on it. A lifeboat is effectively on the ocean the equivalent of surrendering in the same way that a parachute in the air is the equivalent of surrendering. Once you're out of the thing that does the violence, you have surrendered. It's not the same as on the ground.
So in Star Wars, it does seem to largely be considered generally wrong to shoot escape pods. Under the Empire, if a gunner captain shoots an escape pod, they have to file Form XTM51CT to justify the action. But the First Order doesn't seem to have Form XTM51CT.
Because then they just started blasting.
After Starkiller Base is destroyed, the First Order sends a fleet to bombard the Resistance base on Dakar, which is swiftly evacuated. The Resistance takes out a First Order Manticore IV class siege dreadnought and escapes into hyperspace, but using new tech, the First Order can track through hyperspace. So in the middle of space, in the Oechi system, 30 Resurgent-class destroyers and the flagship Supremacy take out nearly all of the Resistance ships, leaving only the MC-85 star cruiser Radis just out of reach.
Because, let's be real, those Mon Cala cruisers are built right, and those things can take a lot of freaking punishment.
Well, and the MC-85 is huge compared to the MC-80. The MC-80 is Home One from Return of the Jedi.
Oh, so this sucker is bigger.
Much bigger. That is as big as a Lucre Hulk. That is as big as a Lucre Hulk. Now, Lucre Hulk's like a ring and stuff, so like, I don't know, but like, same width.
It's a lot of mass.
Uh-huh.
Significantly larger than like a First Order Star Destroyer as well.
Like, you get why they retreated to it. Why it was the last one left over, you know? Running low on fuel and unable to keep out of range forever, the Resistance fully abandoned the Radis, escaping aboard 30 U-55 load lifters, a shieldless, weaponless craft nicknamed lifeboats.
It really is like just a space lifeboat.
Uh-huh. They send these lifeboats with the logic that the transports are going to be too small to be spotted at a distance, but the First Order knows their plans, and they fire on the lifeboats, which destroys 24 of them. Only 6 get away, and that's only because Admiral Holdo runs the fucking Radis into the Supremacy. Like, they would not have gotten away. But obviously, don't think that just because they don't always shoot down escape pods, the Empire cares about protected persons. They obviously super don't. We know that the Empire kills a lot of civilians, and the Empire blowing up a significant chunk of Jeddah is kind of the ultimate bombing a church, which is also, I mean, there was insurgent action on Jeddah, but destroying the whole city is pretty indiscriminate and also kind of a genocide, so...
There's a lot of force religions, right? And Jeddah's kind of important for a lot of force religions.
Genocide, which is a thing that the Empire does all the time. Hey, Sophie, how do the Geneva Conventions feel about genocide?
Not great.
In contrast to all of this, it seems like the Capital A Alliance, as a stratified political military organization, probably does the least war crimes of any major film-relevant division in the Star Wars political landscape. Besides the Resistance, it would seem, but they are not around for that long and not really a stratified political organization.
Resistance is kind of pathetic compared to the Alliance, really.
They weren't around as long. The Alliance does have a problem with individual actors that join its ranks doing war crimes unsanctioned. We already know about the Partisans from last episode, whom the Alliance kicked out, but the Spectres in Star Wars Rebels also pull some questionable stunts. But a lot of that is kind of before the Rebels really, become a unit.
Start engaging in what you would call general war with the Empire.
Kinda, yeah. But we are talking about war crimes, so I am going to ask a classic question. When the Alliance downs an ISD, the people on board are military personnel, right? Mm-hmm. All presumably justified casualties of war. Same thing with the Death Star 1. But what about the Death Star 2? So the Death Star 2 is an unfinished military battle station. It is filled with active laborers. The laborers are referred to by Jar Jar as his men, but we also know it includes construction droids. Remember that while droids are largely treated as expendable objects by people in universe, we have established on this show that the division between droids and other sentients is arbitrary at best, so I think we can, at least for now, reasonably consider them as casualties. Anyway, they are forced to work with the use of restraining bolts, so that surely counts as individuals in the power of an adverse party. Some troops are doing the work, but I don't know, I think it's kind of reasonable to assume there are probably contracted organics aboard. We know the workers are doing 16-hour shifts over 20-hour cycles. Should we assume that any technicians aboard are part of the Army or Navy? The question is it a war crime to explode the Death Star 2?
I'm gonna go with no, actually. Regardless of who is working, a military work is a valid target for war. Because one, you as the attacking party cannot know that there are people who are there against their will. And secondly, you're not actually the one committing the war crime in that case. If you kill an installation full of slaves, it's on them? Yeah. Forcing civilians from a hostile state or your own civilians to work in war production is itself a war crime. So that one's on them. I'm not going to say that the rebels...
So the slaves deserve to die.
It's obviously a rough situation, but you do have to remember that it is war and bad shit is going to happen. And so the reason that it is illegal to force people to work in military works under the Geneva Conventions is to stop this from happening.
So if you are a space contractor and you are not a previous military employee, but the military, who you know is having an active war, hires you and you're like, sure, I'll sign on to that, it's on you.
Congratulations, that's on you. If you're conscripted involuntarily to work in armament works, that's a war crime on the people who did it, but it's not a war crime if you get blown up as a result.
Okay, so let's bring all of it together. We've talked about real-world laws of war. We've talked about how people in Star Wars don't really adhere to those, but the obvious counterpoint is, Ellie, Sophie, those are our laws of war. What does Star Wars have? Let's ask, what happens in Star Wars when people do the kind of stuff we in the real world understand as war crimes? And typically, the answer is nothing. Nothing happens. So, the Republic seems largely pretty fine with, all of that. And the Jedi Council is composed of people like Obi-Wan who just do that stuff. Ki-Adi-Mundi directs his clone troops to burn Geonosian opponents alive with flamethrowers, which is the sort of action condemned by some real-world bodies for causing unnecessary suffering. You're not going to be able to try it.
I am anti-flamethrower.
I am also anti-Jedi Masters on the Jedi Council ordering troops to burn sentient beings alive with flamethrowers. The times we know that the Jedi were put on trial during the war are after instances of treason, like Proset Dibs trying to kill Mace Windu, or Ahsoka Tano being framed for a terrorist attack. If you're doing it to further the aims of the Republic war effort, kinda anything goes. Sort of. Remember when I mentioned Form XTM51CT that's meant to discourage shooting escape pods? Well, in the book From a Certain Point of View, the reason for that form is given as avoiding the Imperial Senate from claiming the Navy engaged in war crimes. And there's a good chance that the term shows up elsewhere that I just haven't found, which means there's some idea of what that means in universe. Obi-Wan does name the Yavin Code as determined by the Yavin Convention as an excuse to be blindfolded prior to his intended execution.
Yavin Conventions.
Not what Obi-Wan says.
Well, that's because he's wrong.
Which is this obvious parallel, right? Again, he's stalling time for Anakin. Apparently, Obi-Wan often cites the Yavin Code, which is this 1,000-year-old bit of law, and he does it as an excuse because no one else really remembers it, including the battle droids he tells it to. So the only person who remembers the Yavin Code is this guy who does what we would understand as war crimes fairly openly, and he only brings it up to stall for time. I love Obi-Wan in this episode of our show.
Obi-Wan the war criminal.
He's so good. We do have another instance of a potential law of war. Again, referring back to our last episode, Saw Gerrera was formally condemned and kicked out of the Alliance High Command for targeting civilians and torturing prisoners. In that condemnation, Mon Mothma cites standards governing humane behavior, including the traditions established under the Ruusan Armistice, which is interesting. We don't know shit about the Ruusan Armistice other than the fact that it seems to establish a precedent for humane behavior during war. In Legends, the Ruusan Reformation was the legal restructuring of the Republic after the New Sith Wars, turning it into the political institution we tend to understand as the Republic. Ruusan was the planet on which the Sith Empire was defeated, and thus the war ended. This restructuring occurred in 1000 BBY at a similar time as the Yavin Convention in canon. The Reformation involved a degree of Republic demilitarization following the war, particularly the demilitarization of the Jedi Order, as well as decentralizing power from the Supreme Chancellor, the reorganization of the then millions of galactic sectors into 1024 and senatorial representation to match, and the resetting of the galactic calendar.
So when they did the Ruusan Reformation, they did like a Napoleon where he's like, this is the 4e an de la République.
Pretty much.
They invented a new calendar.
Yeah, but it stuck.
Oh, it wasn't stupid?
No.
And didn't come with like a weird religion that worshipped reason? Interesting.
The Ruusan Reformation is nominally canon. Fun fact, the one time it's referred to in canon, it's actually the Ruusan Reformations.
I have a Geneva Conventions nerd in the Star Wars
Star Wars. But anyway, it's in canon, but it lacks nearly all context, so it's certainly possible that the Ruusan Armistice is something that could have been established as part of that legal reorganization, or within that tradition. If that's the case, then the Ruusan Armistice would be the humanitarian precedent for the entirety of the Clone War era Republic, meaning that Anakin torturing Poggle the Lesser to extract information.
Anakin did enhanced interrogation?
Anakin did a few instances of enhanced interrogation. That would be in violation of the Ruusan Armistice. There's a lot of torture in Star Wars, but at least the New Republic outlawed torture as an interrogation tactic in the Galactic Concordance. Star Wars at least seems to largely view torture as like pretty morally bad, so that's good. Though of course the New Republic still uses repurposed torture tech in the form of 620 mitigators as therapy for some people, particularly to help them overcome Imperial propaganda using lower voltages that can pretty easily be turned up to barbaric levels, so maybe those should be kind of regulated somehow or something.
What?
Did you not see that episode of The Mandalorian?
No, I did. So
the Empire uses this type of torture called a mind flayer, where they put you in the machine and press the torture button. It seems probably expensive.
This is not torture. It's enhanced de-brainwashing.
I think it is reasonable to assume that that is true, but I don't think that your therapy machine should have a kill setting. So, in Star Wars, there might be laws of war. So, what constitutes a war crime? I don't know, some of them, but no one's held accountable to them. No one goes on trial for...
Yeah, Obi-Wan is not court-martialed for perfidy.
Ever.
I mean, to be honest, very few people have ever been tried for war crimes except after World War II. As I mentioned, the ICC has existed for 21 years now. How many people do you think have been tried in the ICC, Eleanor?
It's like 30.
31.
You said it earlier.
Oh, I did. Okay, well, it's good to remember that we have this organization that is $156 million a year of like UN money, and they have tried 31 people.
Oh.
Largely because they have no jurisdiction anywhere that matters. Russia, United States.
I will say a clear corollary to that is that there were people in like Imperial High Command that were tried after the Galactic Concordance in canon, but that's kind of the only time.
After the big bad thing
After
happens.
the Nazis happened.
After the Nazis happened, yeah.
So... we could ask, what is a law if it isn't enforced? But we did that 2 episodes ago. Go listen to it. I will say, I really like the way that the past 3 episodes have kind of linked together.
Yeah, it's been like a good series of segues.
Yeah, so we talked about what law is and how it can be enforced unequally, and then we talked about capital W war crime guy Saw Gerrera, and now we're kind of gently synthesizing the two. I'm really proud of how it feels like with the past 11 episodes, we are putting together a web of political ideas in and from Star Wars that will always be relevant as we keep discussing. I'm really proud of this show, and again, really grateful to everyone who tunes in every couple of weeks.
Merry Christmas, because well, no, it won't be. Never mind.
No.
Happy New Year and other holidays that you might be celebrating in the near future.
It's January as this comes out.
Happy New Year.
It'll have gone, but sure.
No one celebrate President's Day anymore.
Isn't President's Day in February?
Shut up.
Tell the listeners thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. If you want to listen to new episodes...
No. We have to do emails.
Oh, we have to do emails.
Our first email comes from Miranda here. Miranda here says, "Hello, I adore your podcast, and part of me wishes I had emailed in weeks ago, though another part is glad to email in regarding this week's episode given the subject matter. Yeah, sorry Miranda here, this took us a while to get to, because we had some long apps, but... So I have a thought regarding Nemik's manifesto, the literal presence and measurement of the Force, and the arc of galactic history literally bending toward justice because it's a Campbellian fairy tale in space, for better or worse, per your November 1st episode. I think it's probably something you two have thought about as well, but didn't have time to get into, and it's regarding Nemik's last line, which you utilize lovingly in your intro. Remember this. Try. We may know how the arc bends in Star Wars. Yoda certainly thinks he knows, but Nemik doesn't. Cassian doesn't. Marva certainly doesn't, but she still tells us from beyond the grave, fuck the Empire, fight the Empire in the final take. And I don't think Gilroy knows either, nor do I think that he wants to know. That's funny. That's funny, Miranda here. Nemik's try is in direct dialogue with Yoda's famous do or do not. There is no try. To Yoda, the Force moves in mysterious ways, but it is his ally, and the defeat of Palpatine and the Empire is in service to restoring the balance of the Force, not the other way around. Yoda is tuned in and can see and feel the Force, but he's also manifestly wrong about the need to kill Vader or to allow Han and Leia to die by not falling for the Bespin trap. Luke made that 1 in a million shot, but it was set up for him by all those people without this mythical connection to the Force who didn't follow Yoda's advice. They tried. Many failed, but the ones who kept trying and got lucky opened up chances for others to take. I think that's a lot more powerful message for us here in the real world than the idea that Luke Skywalker, Jedi Master, a legend, could walk out with a laser sword and face down the whole First Order.
So I do have something kind of interesting to say with regards to how the universe bends morally, and that's to talk about Norse paganism, actually. So Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, as you probably know since you seem like our kind of nerd, big fans of Norse paganism. Despite the fact they were both like extremely Catholic and or Anglican, they thought that there was a sort of nobility to Norse paganism because in Norse paganism, the moral arc of the universe bends towards injustice. You know, you have in Christian and Muslim and Jewish and most other eschatologies kind of things will end good versus Norse paganism, which has Ragnarok, which is where the gods lose and the entire world is plunged into hell forever.
Well, and we have this in fucking Tolkien clear as day. The Lord of the Rings is this story about this magical, beautiful world getting demonstrably worse, right? Dagor Dagorath is essentially like Ragnarok. It is the last battle, not the last battle like C.S. Anyway, moving on.
And the world will pass away, and we don't know. Tolkien and Lewis, despite having their own eschatologies, thought that there was something really noble in how, despite not having a good end to work for, all these Norse pagans still kept going. If you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, you have something like, you have hope. You have it in your scripture, in your whatever, that things are gonna end up okay no matter how shitty it is right now. Whereas in Norse paganism, it's all gonna go to shit, but they keep trying. And so they're like, I have my own thing and I obviously believe this, but I think that's quite noble. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at here a little bit, is like, even if you don't necessarily have knowledge that the moral arc of the Star Wars universe bends towards justice, trying anyway is something very noble.
Miranda here continues. And while Luke also changed his mind about passing on what he had learned, I think what he had to say about the hubris in deifying the Jedi as hero gods on a pedestal is very right. There's a reason why we love Andor so much. It shows us the large part of the galaxy that doesn't connect to the Force beyond maybe religious/philosophical ways. They can't have utter faith and just do the damn thing, but they can try and fail and try again. Thank you so much for your time and reading this bit of a ramble, and I hope it was worth looking at. Middle of December can't come soon enough. I look forward always to hearing your next episode. Best, Phil, aka Miranda here. P.S. Already rated and reviewed you on iTunes. Come on, listener comrades, join me. Do that.
Do that.
And told you directly I adore the show when we were both at Star Wars Explains book club for Crimson Climb. I tell everyone with even a passing interest in Star Wars to listen to your pod.
Aww.
Best Star Wars discussions I've ever been lucky to listen to. Thank you very much, Miranda here. It was lovely getting to
nice.
talk with you on Star Wars Explains book club. Always a very good book club if you are a Star Wars Explained Patreon. I highly recommend it. Yeah, I think you are largely right. Since Andor came out, people have been pretty eager to put what Nemec said in dialogue with Yoda's extremely famous line. And I really like the way that you've done it here, because I think when people take it as a simple refutation, like Nemec is based, Yoda is wrong, I think that kind of misses where Yoda's at, because like Yoda is not telling you how to fight a war against fascists. Yoda is telling you how to achieve enlightenment. Yoda is saying, literally, you lift the big spaceship out of the swamp by just lifting the spaceship. Like, that is kind of how the Force works within Star Wars. It is Zen, it is inner peace, and like extending that beyond yourself. But like, that's not what Nemec's doing.
In Eastern Orthodoxy, right, which is the branch of Christianity that none of us knows anything about because we live in the West, they kind of engage with their faith in a lot different way than most of us do, right? They have this kind of idea, which is really interesting and much more Eastern, that faith is not about intellectual consent. My faith is not about intellectually assenting to a series of propositions. It is about being in communion with the living God. The Force is kind of the same way, in that if you're only engaging with the Force on an intellectual level, you're never going to get anywhere. You have to let the Force breathe through you. Let the Force live in you so that you can express it out to the whole world. And I think that's really a kind of an interesting dialogue with different ideas about religion, both Western, Eastern, also with Buddhism, which is kind of similar in the way that it asks you to let the universe express itself through you as a way to enlightenment. Here, Miranda here, you should keep sending in comments so I have an excuse to talk about philosophy or religion things that I think are interesting.
Thank you so much for your email, Miranda here. We really appreciate it and would love to hear more from you. Sophie especially, apparently.
Yeah, I would.
Our next email is from Richard N. Richard says, "Hi, big fan of the podcast. I have a question I'd love to hear your thoughts on. What authority do the Jedi have? They fight wars, arrest people, including trying to arrest the Chancellor, and even in peacetime kill people. But under what authority? Are they some kind of official law enforcement or just a powerful group who have been doing this stuff for so long nobody questions it?" Okay. Richard, I'm gonna tell you something. There is no difference between a powerful group who has been doing this stuff in the, quote unquote protection of laws or enforcement or whatever, and law enforcement. It's the same.
I think they're like the Knights Templar. They're a religious organization that does stuff to protect the interests of a certain state that exists without necessarily being like allowed to. And there's like the weird, like kind of like for a while coalition between certain kingdoms, feudal kingdoms, and the Knights Templar in like protecting their interests. But then later, when the Knights Templar start becoming too powerful and having too much influence over the various states, they get exterminated.
Interesting.
They actually get a crusade called against them, funnily enough.
So eventually we will really dig into the Jedi as cops, but it's important to remember that the Jedi's relationship to the Republic does vary. It seems like they are less law enforcement back at the time of the High Republic, so, a couple hundred years before the Phantom Menace. We talked about in Legends the Ruusan Reformation, and a big part of that was specifically making the Jedi less of a military organization. Because in Legends, they were this really, like, strict military structure kind of for and with the Republic, and then they get monkified.
There's almost like a way in which it's impossible to separate the Jedi and the Republic because they were so integral to the creation of each other.
At least at this point.
I don't know. Do they get Republic funding?
I don't think so, but I can't tell.
It feels like they have to because they're always flying places on Republic business.
That is true.
And they have like a real big temple in like the Star Wars equivalent of downtown Manhattan, pretty close to the
It's extremely close to the Senate building.
Like,
yeah, I don't...
Some weird church and state stuff going on here.
There's got to be laws that like name stuff about the Jedi that are like, this is their relationship. But maybe they're not. Maybe it's all soft. Maybe it's just tradition. Maybe it's like this thick web of tradition
maybe it's
that...
like the British Constitution, which is not an actual document, and it's just a thick web of traditions.
Okay, you have brought that up multiple times.
It's so annoying.
A lot of what law is just...
writing down tradition, I know.
Stuff that is predicated, stuff that a judge decided. Yeah, that's kind of what the Jedi are. I don't know, it's weird and it's woolly, but that is always what law and law enforcement are. The Jedi are kind of cops. Someday we'll talk about cops.
Oh, talking about cops, though, that's a big topic.
That's why we're not doing it right now. Our last email is from Joel Davis. Joel says, "Hello, Daughters of Ferrix. I'd love to get your thoughts on the New Republic, and more importantly, its point, especially from an out-of-universe perspective. Let's face it, the only reason the New Republic is a failure in the first place was that J.J. Abrams wanted his Rebels versus Empire conflict and decided to blow it up with Starkiller, thus making other authors and creators find ways to justify how the New Republic could be so easily taken out." I'll come back to that in just a sec. Some novels, like Bloodline, portray the New Republic's biggest flaw as being too successful and having so much peace that they got complacent thinking the Empire could never return. In the later Mandoverse stuff, we're seeing more of the opposite approach taken of a Republic that can barely function. So really, it's hard, at least for me, to come to any sort of conclusion about the New Republic and a Republic in general, because there doesn't seem to be a grander statement behind it apart from whatever the author wants. This will be made more clear depending on how the Rey New Jedi Order film goes, because for all we know, the creators of that film may say the Republic is back and functioning now as Rey builds her Jedi Order. Again, curious about your thoughts on how the out-of-universe context affects your read of in-universe history. Love this podcast, Joel Davis. Okay, Joel. You are correct that the reason that the New Republic exists is...
to die.
Pretty much. But the reason the Empire ends in episode 6 is because George Lucas got kind of tired of the filmmaking process and changed it from a 9-episode plan to a 6-episode plan. Like, these sorts of creative decisions, the whatever the author wants, is sort of the sauce that makes Star Wars go. We usually don't have these political military conflicts because someone wants to write a political military conflict. Occasionally we do, and that's really cool. But sometimes someone just wants to tell a fun story.
You want to blow stuff up.
And that's fine. That's what Star Wars is. Star Wars is as much pulp as it is politics.
I think it's more pulp than it is politics.
Well, yeah, but...
our paycheck that doesn't exist depends on coming up with politics out of Star Wars. You know, the thing that's interesting to me about the New Republic is kind of its parallels, where the downfall of a state can be as much from internal factors as external factors, right? You have all of these things going on inside of the New Republic that makes it kind of uniquely susceptible to an external shock, regardless of whether it is just because the author wanted to blow shit up, is kind of the stuff of which Empire's falling is made. This kind of slow buildup of multiple factors. Yeah, maybe they are dysfunctional and can't actually govern because they have too loose of a confederation of states because they decide to go with the Articles of Confederation instead of the Constitution. Like, all of these things put together are what makes the sauce of societal collapse. I think it's really interesting that all of these authors are coming together and kind of inadvertently creating that soup, organically, not planning to do so. Yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Well, and from an out-of-universe perspective, I don't see it as accidental. I think there is a clear through line from something like the way we see the New Republic presented in Ahsoka to what we see in Bloodline. And yes, it's all made out of whole cloth to justify another thing, but so is all Star Wars extended storytelling.
So's life.
Yeah, that's fine.
There's so many stories in our history that would seem so contrived if we didn't know they were true. Like, I don't know. The American Revolution is too stupid to have happened. It happened because they were mad about tea prices. And like 6'2" guys with wooden teeth paddling across the river on Christmas Eve to kill some Germans. Like, history is ridiculous. Star Wars is ridiculous. And I'm gonna maybe go out on a limb here. I kind of like that all the weird authors are able to put their own spin on it for whatever they want, because it makes it seem more real to me when there's all this weird stuff going on that doesn't necessarily make sense.
We talk a lot about George Lucas on this podcast. I don't think we could make a podcast about Star Wars politics if we were only stuck with what George Lucas has to say. Because George Lucas has a specific idea of politics, and it's fun, and I like those 6 movies, but I like having more. Not just because I like having more, but because different perspectives mean we can talk about different stuff. The New Republic is this story of a state that kind of miraculously forms from this insane, like, authoritarian regime.
Nightmare.
And does an okay job, but like...
They don't have enough money, their confederation is too loose because they're afraid of the thing that just happened to them happening again.
And they like kind of overly integrate the old empire into themselves in the hopes of having a stable state. And that's one of the things that kills them. Like, a huge chunk of the New Republic secedes from itself. I would like a little more storytelling about it, but I would argue that that is in some ways a more like organic political story than the Separatists, which are manufactured. The First Order, Palpatine's around, but the First Order is created and bolstered by bits of the Empire that are left and by fascists and going, we want to just do fascism instead of the New Republic. And then it works. They do a coup. Like, that, I think, is really juicy.
I mean, since we're talking about fascists doing coups, how do you think the Nazi Party was formed? It's fascists, and it's guys from the last war who are mad because they didn't get to keep doing weird Kaiser-censored authoritarianism and invade France.
Which, there are some, like, imperialist tendencies in the Republic during the Clone Wars, but so much of the time we talk about the Empire as a thing that Palpatine did to the Republic. And obviously, those seeds were there, but, like, there's no imperial party. There was essentially a First Order party. And that's crazy, because we don't get that very often.
People forget that the fascists in Italy, the Nazis in Germany, I mean, hell, we had fascist parties in the United States. Like, these people competed. Well, we have one. No, these people competed in elections. Like, they were active in political life. You're president of the United States, right? You walk up to the State of the Union address and you're like, hey, we should sure do fascism in this country. Wouldn't that be cool? People did that. And the fact that because of the messiness of the New Republic, people do that in the New Republic, I think is awesome.
A general sentiment is that Starkiller is a cop-out and that it's cheap, and
I kind of agree with that one.
It is. It's fine. I will say, I think in canon they've done a really good job of seeding the creation of Starkiller. I find it very believable now, but I agree with you. It's a cheat. It's a narrative cheat, but that's fine. It's not a big deal. Having these stories about the New Republic where it's trying to keep itself going, and then it just is destroyed because it didn't do good enough, I like that. I like The Force Awakens.
The moral arc of the New Republic does not bend towards justice.
Star Wars likes telling the stories about semi-democratic institutions that kind of crumble from the inside.
They like telling the fall of the Roman Empire is what they like telling.
George Lucas. Thank you for your email, Joel. It gave us a lot to talk about. If you have something you want to say to us, you want to tell us about your favorite Star Wars war crime, or you have any questions, suggestions, or corrections, you can send them to our show email, daughtersferrix@gmail.com.
If you want to listen to new episodes as they release every other Wednesday, you can find us on most places you can listen to podcasts, on our website, daughtersofferrix.com, or follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FerrixPod, FerrixPod.
If there's anyone you know who you reckon would like the show, make sure to share it with them. We really appreciate any chance you give us to grow. I have been Eleanor Mueller. You can find me at The Letter Bomber on most platforms.
I've been Sophia Dunstan. You can find me at Sophia in SLC on Twitter, and at my other podcast, the Redline_pod on Twitter, where we talk about trains, cities, and sometimes war crimes. We have talked about war crimes.
Our episodes are written and edited by me, Eleanor Mueller, and Sophia Dunstan. Our podcast art is by Jill Mueller. Our intro and outro music was arranged by me, with themes by Nicholas Bertel and John Williams. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, I am sorry if I call you Eleanor.